Hello everyone, my name is Don Ward, I'm Chief Executive of CIB, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the pilot of our new series which we're calling CIB in Conversation. For those of you who don't know, CIB is the global network for research and innovation in buildings and construction. And to all our viewers today, or who are watching the recorded version later on, whether you're members of CIB or whether you're guests from around the world, a very, very warm welcome, and I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. For more information about what we do, how we add value for our global research community, please refer to this website here, which you can see on the screen. Anyway, the purpose of this series of conversations is all about meeting the personalities behind leading players and thought leaders in the world of built environment research. And today we are really pleased to welcome Michael Behm. Now, as it happens, Michael is currently the Program Director of CIB, which means that he's responsible for supporting and facilitating the work of our working commissions, our task groups, our student chapters, and so on. But we're not here to talk about all that today. Today we're going to talk in his capacity as a leading researcher in the field of health, safety, and well-being. So welcome, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Don.
Great. Well, so can I call you Mike? Is that okay?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Mike, let's start by giving us a quick overview of your career and then your area of research.
Yeah, so I've been really embedded in the field of occupational health and safety my whole career, and really got into the built environment sector in the 90s, really when economic times were really good. And the corporation that I worked for, we were building new facilities. We were building new manufacturing facilities all over North America. And so
you came from the industry. So your early career was in the industry, was it?
Well, I worked for the manufacturing sector, but like I said, we were building a lot of facilities. We were, doing a lot of additions and got involved a lot in the design and construction, and how that kind of impacted our manufacturing setting. And yeah, then lo and behold, I quit my corporate job and went back for a PhD and did that, and really got involved in some things, safety through design.
Right.
And was really thinking, at that time in the early 2000s, the notion of green buildings was really growing, and trying to integrate the concepts of safety through design into green buildings. And that's one of the areas that I'm really interested in.
Mike, that's fantastic. Thank you. What a great overview and a great kickoff for us. What made you move from manufacturing then into the world of academia?
Well, that's a really good question. I think when you're a little bit younger, you kind of think that, I can do this PhD thing, and doing the PhD was a really eye-opening experience. It made me realize how much I didn't know. Yeah. It really set me on a journey for lifelong learning. It was a very, I think I was 32 maybe when I went back for my PhD, and so. Yeah. And so, but it was a great experience being at Oregon State University and just meeting all the faculty and getting to work with faculty, and just the buzz of the university experience. I think as a more mature student, I certainly appreciated it more than I did when I was 18 to 22.
And do you think, having come from industry, from the manufacturing sector, that gave you a certain advantage as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, coupled with being around some really good researchers who ask some really good questions, and sometimes I think in industry we get so set in our ways of particularly doing things that we don't. I learned that it's the question. It's not how many answers that we know, but it's how many really good questions that we can ask to learn more and try to improve things. So that was a really good experience.
And if plenty of our viewers today will be from the world of PhDs and students, and or they may be early career researchers. So do you have a single tip from, if you can remember that far back, if that isn't a rude way of putting it? Do you have a simple tip for people doing their PhD at the moment, or maybe contemplating the next step in their career?
Yeah, sure. I can think of one particular point. Always say yes.
Always
No
say
matter
yes.
how, no matter small the opportunity is. I was on a primarily, tied to one particular college when I was out at Oregon State, and a professor from civil engineering was doing some work in construction safety, and I had a little bit of time to give, and so I said yes, and that really changed my career. That's where I did my dissertation. That's how I actually got involved in CIB and learned that CIB existed, was from that particular professor. So, it certainly, changed the way I think and changed the course of my life. So say yes. If the opportunity looks interesting, say yes.
And what if it doesn't? Still say yes.
If it doesn't look interesting, then say no. If you're not interested, I'd say maybe there's a reason why you're not interested. But if it sounds interesting, go for it.
I think that's a really good tip, Michael. Thank you. Let's then, you made it clear that your motivation in moving into academia was around green buildings. So tell us a little bit about what's become your area of research, this whole area of health, safety, and well-being in green buildings.
Yeah, so it became apparent, in early on in the 2000s that the notion of green, and the words green building and sustainable buildings were kind of being used interchangeably.
Yes.
And from when you really kind of operationally defines what sustainability is, it's a little bit more than just being green. It's a little bit more than the environment. It certainly has to do with the economic sphere and being financially sound in terms of that green investment. And then so naturally in a capitalistic society, that comes along naturally. But the third pillar of sustainability is that social dimension. And so that was kind of, one of those, that was the dimension that seemed to be lagging behind. And it certainly was where my discipline of occupational health and safety and well-being fit into the sustainability definition. So we were trying to make that connection with the United States Green Building Council as early as about 2002, 2003.
Okay, so to bring it alive a bit, have you got an example of a building or a project which would demonstrate the sorts of things you're talking about there?
Yeah, so I was working with NIOSH, which is the United States Governmental Research Agency, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. I was working with them on a couple of projects, and my main contact, we've been talking with the Green Building Council and trying to make some inroads. And my main contact called me from Boston. I think it was about 2009. I think, or 2010, and she said, "You're not going to believe what I just saw, Mike." She said, "I just saw a bunch of landscapers on the top roof of an 8-story building hoisting up a lawnmower on this really little thin rope." And so thus my journey in looking at green roofs and how we build, operate, maintain green roofs began.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well,
yeah.
Tell us a little more then about green research.
Yeah, so actually from that conversation and from the NIOSH group that I was in, Brian Kleiner from Virginia Tech, who's on the board of CIB.
CIB board, yes.
Many folks may know, we had a conversation and he said, well, this sounds really interesting. Why don't you come up to Virginia Tech and give a talk? And so I did, and then Brian gave me a little bit of grant money to investigate green roofs in the U.S. And then that kind of, these things kind of, again, I guess it goes back to that say yes. So, you know,
Does,
it wasn't,
doesn't it? Yes, it's a very good example of
it,
that. Oh, yeah.
it kind of, things just kind of spun. And so through my work with green roofs, I learned that in Singapore, that they had so Singapore is a very small city state, very highly populated, but yet very, very green. If anybody's ever been to Singapore, it's extremely green,
Green and clean.
urban,
Yeah.
green and clean. Yes, green and clean. Yes, yes. So lots of urban greenery systems. And so I found online that the same time I was looking at green roofs in the United States, that the National Parks Board of Singapore actually put forth a small guidance document on the safe design of rooftop greenery systems. And so it was really strange that somebody on the other side of the world was thinking the same thing that I was thinking at the same time.
Yes.
And so I learned more and did my research and found out that this organization had a fellowship program. And so I applied for it, and they offered me the fellowship, and I spent a lot of time in Singapore studying urban greenery systems and how green walls and green roofs and ledges and all the interesting things that go along with Singapore, the super trees that folks might be familiar with, how they're designed, constructed, maintained. And then we got to contribute to some revisions of that particular document and I published some other work. So it was really interesting to see how Singapore was doing things, and really, that they were doing things in terms of the future of urban greenery systems, which I think are taking hold today in a lot of particular places.
As you said earlier, Mike, it is a great example of the maxim you gave us, which is just say yes to opportunity.
Yeah.
And then who knows? I'd like personally the maxim. The harder I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
It sounds like kind of you fall into that as well. Where would you say this area of research has got to today then? What 10 years on, would you say? 12 years on from then?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, particularly here in the States, we're at a bit of a standstill in terms of really trying to integrate design into all the built environment. We don't have the construction design and management regulations that are in the UK, that are spread throughout the European Union, that's in Australia, Singapore, South Africa, and other parts of the world. So we actually created a safety through design green building credit that was adopted by the United States Green Building Council.
Okay, so that's in LEED. So
that's in the LEED system. Yep. We've done some work there, but since it's been a little bit stagnant, to be quite honest. So there is a little bit of work to continue. It
strikes me as a good example of impact, Mike, from your work, on the basis of how, I don't know how many thousands of buildings are now assessed using LEED, but they'll all now at least have had to think about this area of.
Yeah, and it was a pilot credit. It was tried as a pilot credit. It still is a pilot credit. It's not mandatory. So that's
Right. Okay. Okay.
We'd like it to be.
Looking at options, people can choose the options that will get them an extra certification level, won't they?
That's correct.
Yeah. That good. And why would you say that CIB members and others around the world, ought to be taking this topic so seriously?
Well, I mean, I think the built environment certainly ties in with one of the UN sustainability goals, and as populations grow and as the urban environment grows, incorporating green building systems, and specifically green roofs and urban greenery systems. I mean, it was amazing in Singapore, the biodiversity that actually came back because of these urban greenery systems, butterflies, bees. In fact, we were on the fourth, on the top of a 4-story car park in Singapore. We go around the corner and there's a snake.
Really? Yeah.
And so we were kind of shocked to see that type of biodiversity, in this urban environment. So, and in terms of the, Singapore with the monsoon season and all the environmental benefits in terms of green roofs, in terms of limiting runoff and those types of things. A huge issue, a huge benefit. So. And it's beautiful too. I mean, if folks have ever been to Singapore, you know, again, I can't speak for other places, but the urban greenery systems are just absolutely beautiful. So high aesthetic value for the building owner, which also kind of led into my research in terms of, well, how do you maintain these things in a safe and efficient manner? So really tying safety into that aesthetic value and the productivity.
Oh,
so
you've
hopefully
connected with quite a number of other CIB working commission themes there, haven't you? So you very much an integrated approach or integrated thinking that you're applying there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Policymakers, I think you alluded to policymakers and why they should be looking at this area, particularly if they don't have the health and safety legislation, CDM type approaches. You know, what's the sort of latest state of the art, or where's the next area for development, do you think, Mike, in this sort of area?
Well, I mean, I guess I would like to think that property owners would like to have their buildings maintained. So we saw a lot of different roofs here in the States. And again, this is about 9 years ago. I think it was 2011 that we did this particular study. And it was really, you know, the folks that we talked to. So for example, there was some roofs in Chicago where Chicago had a policy where if you put a green roof onto the building, you got a tax credit. Now, unfortunately, once the green roof was finished, then it got inspected. And so it never got inspected again. And so that meant that the green roof only had to last a couple of weeks, a couple of months until it got inspected.
Yeah. And
so you could kind of see that there was a little bit of game playing going on with that. So, you know, I think ensuring that the green roof is installed for the life of the building in a proper way is really important. And then we saw another building where there was kind of a subroof where there were large condominiums in Portland, Oregon. And that subroof was just absolutely gorgeous. Right. And it was highly maintained. Why? Because folks who were living, you know, up in the top floors of the condominium paid high dollar to look at a beautiful green roof rather than some, you know, old black or gray roof. And so, but that roof was extremely beautiful, highly maintained, and it was designed so that so that the workers could actually access it in a safe and efficient way. So I guess then, you know, the next iteration really is, you know, looking at the life cycle of products, processes, and technologies, and, you know, developing tax and other types of funding schemes that allow building owners and financiers to appreciate the long-term nature of their investment in the built environment.
Mike, that's fascinating. Just got a couple of questions actually coming in from our viewers at the moment. One from Debbie, which is asking a general question. What is the United States doing to improve the green built environment arena generally? And then we've got another question, and so you can choose to answer either or both. It's up to you. This person says, you talk a lot about green roofs and urban greenery systems, and you do, by the way, talk very interestingly and very passionately about those. You know, what other green building elements what other building elements do you think where the application of green thinking needs to be combined or integrated with addressing the issue of increased risk for construction or maintenance workers?
Yeah, that's I'll answer the second one first. I think daylighting is one of those areas, one of those green building credits. So whether it be atrium inside of a building, and how do we clean and maintain that, and how do we change the light bulbs, in some of those atriums that are really hard to get to the skylights that are on top of buildings in the U.S. And I've noticed in some other countries too. But in the U.S., we tend to put very cheap skylights on top of buildings for daylighting purposes. And so then when a worker has to go up onto the roof, sometimes they will slip, fall through, do particular things, and they fall. We've had a lot of skylight fatalities like that. We've actually had a couple where people are putting solar panels on top of industrial buildings where there are these fragile skylights, and everywhere there's space on top of the roof, they're putting a solar panel, which is great, but they're putting them right next to these fragile skylights, and lo and behold, eventually somebody trips, somebody falls, so we've had a few fatalities like that where those two green building systems kind of interacting together creates this particular hazard. So that's somewhat, it's predictable. So we can take measures in the design and the redesign phases to reduce those particular hazards.
But in addressing those hazards, you're contributing in a positive way to the green features and characteristics of the building. So you make the point. Yes.
Yeah, and to the holistic view of sustainability.
A holistic view, absolutely. You make the point extremely well. And the more general question, Mike, that came in from.
Oh yeah. So honestly, that's a tough one to answer in the last 3 years. We do have this green building credit, but I've not been really involved in kind of how that green building credit has progressed. Two of my really good colleagues at NIOSH have retired. Okay. So it hasn't been picked up. They had the really great relationship with the United States Green Building Council as well too. And the funny thing about the US GBC is that they hire really smart people. Right. And so but then they tend to get picked up by other private organizations and things like that. And so there's some turnover there. So there was some turnover even while my NIOSH folks were connecting. So that's a tough one to answer from the really immediate, past couple of years standpoint. But that green building credit is still on the books, and something that I hope somebody revisits.
You prompted another question from our viewers. Because you referred to Singapore and some of its unique characteristics, you can probably answer this quite readily, I think. How would you say Singapore differs from other parts of the world in how they view green roofs, and why would they? And are there lessons for encouraging other parts of the world to think the same way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that Singapore really values the aesthetics of their urban environment, and that's from being in Singapore so much. Just the pride of the architects that they had in terms of the green buildings and how they designed things so that they could be maintained easily and keep that aesthetic value, and working, it was really interesting there too, working with a multidisciplinary team in terms of learning about planting strategy and the types of plants, and how different designs can then elicit different planting strategies from a horticulture view and a landscape architecture view was really interesting. But to go back to Singapore specifically, I think it is that aesthetic value that the Singapore culture really, really values. And so having that access to maintain the urban greenery systems is highly important. All the greenery in Singapore is just absolutely gorgeous, very well maintained, and just the architecture structures that they're doing is also quite fascinating in terms of.
I do envy you getting to spend some quality time there, Mike. It's one of the places around the world that's on my wish list, but somehow I've managed not to get there.
The food is wonderful. So.
Food and drink will always be popular with me. This year we've been living through the COVID-19 pandemic, and do you think there are any implications or lessons learned or thoughts that's triggered for you linked to your work? Can your work inform how policy might develop in a post COVID-19 recovery?
Wow, that's a really good question, and trying to tie those things together. I mean, certainly, health and safety on construction sites has been a huge issue. I mean, we've heard some things certainly here in the States. I know there's been some international hotspots in terms of certain construction sites having those particular clusters, and so. Going back to the whole notion of design, I guess I would broadly define the word design in terms of also being more organizational design, and how we, so I like to define design as how we arrange conditions for people to be successful. So if we can start, with thinking about how do we socially distance folks on a construction site, how do we schedule work, how do we schedule materials in and out so that we're not having large groups of people in contact with one another. So, I think that's a really kind of interesting way to look at really prevention of COVID-19, rather than just saying wear your personal protective equipment, wash your hands, which I'm not saying that's not a good thing, but I'm saying is that how do we arrange conditions for people to be successful but then also, do we have enough masks? Do we have enough wash stations? Do we have enough sanitizer? So arranging all those things that are kind of downstream on the site, but arranging things upstream to avoid those clusters of people and those large groups of people.
I think that point is really well made, Mike. It seems to me that pre-COVID-19, there was already a trend slowly moving towards thinking about the well-being of people in buildings, but the well-being of the workforce, if you like, in our sector. And what you've described there is absolutely, just as with technology, just a rapid acceleration in the adoption of latest ideas around the well-being of our workforce. So. Yes, I think you explained that really very well. Mike, where can people learn more about this area of work? Is there a website, or is there? I guess they can Google green roofs or well-being and green roofs, can they?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some articles written. We've written some articles in a couple of journals about the Singapore experience, about the U.S. experience with green roofs. I know that there was some work being done in South Africa around ergonomics and green buildings as well. Germany has always been a leader in green roof systems. And so I think they might be doing some things.
Excellent.
It's interesting, I would encourage folks to Google China's urban forest.
China's urban forest. Yeah.
China's urban forest, and that might be, but I think that'll get you to where you want to go. There's an Italian architect, Stefan Borreri, maybe it's Boerri, and he's been designing these vertical structures, condominiums, and commercial buildings, but that have trees all over them. And so those are things that I'd love to study in the future, and how do we plant these, and then, from a structural loading standpoint, right? So having all these trees and the soil to have those trees there, and then calculating the wet, soil as it's wet, that saturated soil, how does that affect the structural load, is certainly one thing. But then, how do you maintain and do all the things that you need to have this beautiful structure. So I forget the city in China that's exploring with this, but that's a fascinating, some of the pictures will really make you think.
Well, it does sound fascinating. And I tell you what, Mike, don't get too fascinated yourself, because you've got a job to do with CIB these days. And I'm not sure we can spare you to deploy the necessary time to all that area. But I tell you what, maybe one or two of our viewers might be interested. So they should certainly contact you for if they are interested in a presentation, right?
Yep.
Do you want to just give us your email, Mike, so people can make contact?
Yeah, it's Michael.Behm, as you see my name there behind you, and then it's at CIBworld.org.
Fantastic. We'll put that in the note alongside this video when we post it up on YouTube there. It wasn't part of my plan, but two or three times you mentioned aspects of your career that developed as a result of what I might call CIB opportunities. How would you describe the benefit of CIB and how it's contributed or added value to your own development?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in the area of safety through design, there's been a lot of CIB giants, I'd say, that have been working in this particular area. Alistair Gibb is certainly one. Yeah. Helen Lingard from RMIT. John Smallwood from Nelson Mandela down in South Africa. And so these are folks that when I was doing my dissertation, going through those old hard copy CIB proceedings that my professor had, and just trying to go through them and kind of trying to make sense of things. And I still have copies of them in some old boxes, but then
I still do, Michael. Yes.
Yeah, and I think I really think the interesting thing, as a young academic, I believe it was 2000 and I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7, I got to attend my first CIB conference, and it was in Florida at the University of Florida. It was hosted by a longtime CIB proponent, Jimmy Hinsey, who's done a lot of work in construction safety and health, and he was a big W99 person, and so Jimmy's PhD student was my professor out at Oregon State. So some people say that I'm a grandchild of Jimmy Hinsey, which is a great compliment. We have, in fact, to digress just a little bit, we have the Jimmy Hinsey Best Paper Award and Keynote Speech. It's kind of this named thing from when I was a coordinator. Jimmy actually passed away during that particular time, and so we do that now in honor of him, and so it's pretty cool. But anyway, so I got to go to that conference in Florida, which was really fortunate for me because it was a domestic trip, and it wasn't so hard for my university to fund that. And so then I got to meet everybody that I was reading about, and so that was, for me, that was a huge highlight.
That's really good, Mike. So sort of using the CIB network to be able to meet with the key experts in your field of research, and actually, by the sound of it, of course, a great network for identifying or finding those opportunities to which you can say yes, which you've exploited beautifully, I think, and explained very well why that would be such a great maxim.
Yeah, and those things then spiral because you make those connections about the research that you're doing, and so now my name is on, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 papers with Alistair Gibb, with Helen Lingard. So I mean, there's different things that we lead now that we get asked to do, and so but then there's certain people that you can't say no to. So you have to be careful about that. So if Helen asks me to do something, I'm always going to say yes. If Alistair asks me to do something, I'm always going to say yes. If John Smallwood, there's certain people then that so now you can't say no. So it's a double-edged sword.
It is, but Mike, it's great. It's deeply reassuring to me, certainly, to hear how CIB is of value and was helpful in the development of your career. So Mike, just before we finish, there's one question that we like to ask everybody in these conversations, and it's what we call top opportunity, really. Top opportunity. So in your field of expertise, green roofery and so on, what would you say is the top opportunity, or maybe the top challenge, that politicians and policymakers around the world ought to think about?
Well, you know, I think that's a really good question. The construction sector is still disproportionate in terms of its occupational fatalities compared to other sectors.
Yes.
And I think that top level officials, high level officials, you know, maybe they might say, well, it's the dynamic, complex nature of the construction environment, ever changing, and how can we plan and organize these particular things. But I think really that's a view of 30, 40 years ago. I think as technology has advanced in terms of building information modeling, how we understand scheduling, how we understand complex interactions, and how we can predict them on a construction site, I think the global construction sector can do a whole lot better, and that disproportionate, you know, compared to say other sectors like manufacturing, we should have those particular goals.
Mike, one thing we see this top opportunity turning into is actually collecting the set of answers that we get through this series, and I for one am really pleased that what you just said will be the #1 item and top of the list whenever we produce a report of these top opportunities that our guests identify. Yours was the first one, yours will be top of the list, and that is absolutely the most important factor for our sector to work on. So thank you very much. I think that's a great point to end our conversation today. I want to thank you for joining us. It's been terrific. I'm sure that our audience has enjoyed hearing from you about how your career developed, about tips from you, about how others can benefit from what you learn. And I really appreciate not just the work you do for us in CIB, but for your taking the time to do this first of this series of CIB in Conversation. So thank you very much for that. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, and to our viewers, for more information on this event and on Mike's work, for details of other events in the series, please see the website cibworld.org, or other communications such as our monthly newsletter. A reminder, CIB is the global network for research and innovation in buildings and construction, and we're delighted to put on this series of chats, which I hope have been stimulating. We'd love to hear from you, your feedback, whether you found it interesting, enjoyable, how you think we should improve the format, suggestions for other guests to succeed Mike, who set the standard very high there. So, you know, we need some really interesting people. I think you can already pick that up from what Michael's had to say. So with that, thank you so much for watching this event in the CIB in Conversation series, and goodbye from us. Thank you.